many times we were wondering what happened to our former family and how they got to America. And my father was the first one of his family to be born in the United States. He had three brothers that were older than he, Bert and Tom, and can't think of the other name right
Richard.
now.
Dick.
No.
Well, there was...
And then he had two younger, Dick and Harry.
So,
But there was
one more. I didn't realize that.
one more besides
I knew
that.
there was a Bert. I didn't know there was
Mention
another.
Tom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tom, Dick, and Harry.
Yeah, along with Bert and somebody else. They were all born
They were all born in England.
in Wales.
Wales, yeah. That's part of England, isn't it?
It was part of Great Britain.
Okay. Well, anyway, they were, all of them, living in San Antonio, Texas. And when Daddy got married, he got married when he was 20 years old and Mother was 18. And they moved to Memphis, and he went to work at Ford Motor Company painting automobiles.
Before...
He painted with a brush in those days.
Wow, I didn't know that.
And he got to be quite efficient with that.
Bernice was born in Houston, wasn't she?
Bernice and Gilbert both were born in Houston, and
That's where they
I
married.
was the first one to be born in Memphis.
Okay.
I was born on Galloway Street down by the old First Seventh-day Adventist Church in Memphis, and we lived down on Galloway. I was born at 823, and Howard was born at 825 Galloway. They don't exist
Next door?
anymore.
Next door to each other?
Next door to each other. Then later on, of course, we all started to school. Mother and Dad had 6 kids, and Bernice Ruby was the oldest. Mother's name was Ina Ruby, and Dad was Charles Gilbert Mills. And after Bernice, Charles Gilbert Mills Jr. was born. And then I came along, and I was named after my 2 granddads, George Davis and Thomas Mills. And so then, after I came along, Howard came 2 years later, then Dan 2 years later, and Inella Grace was born dead 2 years later after Dan came into the world. And then a few years later, exactly 10 years later than when I was born, Betty Joy was born.
Not the same birthday, but real close.
Not the same birthday. She was born, her birthday is August the, I don't know. My memory fails me. But
We've got it somewhere.
yeah, Gilbert was born August the 5th, and I was born September the 25th. Bernice was born December 18, and Howard was born July the 4th, and Dan was born the 29th of January, and Betty Joy was born the, I don't know, sometime in August, 26th, I believe it was. And we lived in various and sundry places in Memphis, but we were living on Pierce Street, P-I-E-R-C-E was, no, P-E-A-R-C-E, when I was 15 years old. And my closest friend was Aubrey Alexander, a guy who pitched for us in our softball league, and he was later killed on an air crash. He was piloting an air crash in quite an aircraft, and quite a few of them crashed in Lake Melville, Ontario, Canada, and he was one of 4 or 5 that somehow or another got caught in a downdraft and were drowned in the lake.
Hmm.
Then, while we lived on Pierce, I was lucky enough to go away to Collegedale to school. Dr. Gartley took a liking to me, and he had followed me along, and he'd helped me go to church school there in Memphis. And when I finished, he told me that if I wanted to, he'd pay my tuition and board if I went to Collegedale. So I went to Collegedale.
To the academy.
And to the academy. I was in the 10th grade.
They called it Southern Junior College then, didn't they?
Southern Junior College, but I went to Collegedale Academy.
Right.
And I traveled all night getting there. On the train. And I was sitting there waiting 4 hours for a train to take me out to Collegedale, 20 miles away. And they called out the train to Memphis, and I wanted to get back on it. But I had a good time at Collegedale. I roomed with Louis Waller and Edgar Bradley. But first I roomed at the end of the hall with a fellow named Hollis Olson. They were so full they finally had to put 3 in the room. And I moved in with Edgar Bradley and Louis Waller.
Your first room was just partitioned off by a sheet
Partitioned
or
off
something.
by a sheet, yeah.
The end of the hallway?
Into the hallway.
Wow.
And I was on the paint crew there, and I painted in most of the buildings there in some time or another. And then I had another job. I worked 20 hours a week doing painting. And then I got a contract job cleaning the music rooms. And I made 15 hours a week on that. And I didn't have to spend but about 10 hours.
Doing it,
So
huh?
I was lucky.
And you graduated at
I graduated
Collegedale
in
Academy?
1938, in May of 1938. And Gilbert and Mother came up to my graduation, and then we came back home. Then after graduation, Dr. Gartley wanted me to go the next year to...
Oh, before you go on there, I want you to tell a story about the painting in Jones Hall, was it? The girls' residence?
Yeah.
You were painting
I was
down...
painting radiators in the girls' hall, about the girl running down the
Yeah.
hall. A friend of mine named, well, I won't name her. She came running down the hall, stark naked with a towel over her shoulder. She ran by me and said, "Hi, George," and kept right on going. But I had hollered, "Man in the hall," before she came down, but she didn't hear me. So that was one of the
highlights
of the school year. But I had quite a few good friends there. P.J. Moore was one, and he's still doing a little practice in Fletcher.
Yeah.
And Louis Waller's dead.
You
Sue
knew
Waller's dead.
Louis Ludington
Louis
there.
Ludington was in my class, and he's dead now. He died, when he was
20 years ago.
56 years old, I think. And his wife was married to him for 30 years, and then when he died, Clifford's wife died, and they got married. So Clifford Ludington was her second husband.
Oh.
We got a letter from her just recently saying that at 83 she was thinking about getting married again.
Another Ludington?
No, not another Ludington. Well, after I finished at Collegedale, I didn't go to school the next year. I stayed off and did some private duty nursing, even though I didn't know anything about nursing. I was more of a sitter with a fellow from Jackson, Mississippi, who had a cattle farm down there, and he had cancer of the liver. Well, I was with him almost 6 months, and then they finally decided to let him go home, and he offered me 10 head of cattle and 10 acres of ground down just out of Jackson, Mississippi, if I'd go with him until he died.
Wow.
Well, I said, no, I want to go on to medical school. I don't want to be a cattle farmer.
Yeah.
So I turned him down. And then toward the end of that time, I was working in painting trucks for the Memphis Team Laundry. And we painted, I would burn them off one day, prime them the next day, and paint them the next day. And then get them all ready for delivery. I did that on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And no, I went to school on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and I worked on Sunday, Tuesday, and Thursday in the shop. And I took summer school work at Memphis State, and that's where I decided to go to Madison the next year. And I went up to Madison. Aubrey Alexander and I went up there, and Bonnie was already there, and we all stayed in the same cabin. They call it the 1920 cabin, because that's when it was built, and that's when I was born. So we stayed there, and that's when I met the Burwell family. Homer and Lucille were the parents, and Yvonne and Nita, Juanita, but everybody called her Nita. Nita was the older of the two. And I dated Nita, and Aubrey dated Yvonne, and we used to go a lot of places. And the night watchman knew we were doing it, but he couldn't catch us coming in. Because they'd bring us in and they'd drop us off at different places. We'd drive around the campus to see if we saw him. And if we did, we'd run, drive real quick to the other end of the campus, and we'd get off and come on in. But they were the people that introduced me to Homer's brother, Frank Burwell, who owned the X-ray laboratory in Los Angeles. And I didn't go to school in Madison but 6 months or 3 months before the war broke out. And I wanted to be in the medics if I was going in the war. And I was 20 years of age then. And so Homer asked his brother if he needed somebody to come and work with him in the X-ray laboratory, and he always had some young man in there, and he said, yeah, I'll take him. So I went out there, and Austin Davis went with me, and we stayed in the upstairs apartment that Fay and I stayed in after we got married, and when I was in my junior and senior year. Well, 3 weeks after I got there, I didn't know anything about X-ray, but I was going to go to X-ray school there, and I found out that I had all the subjects that they were teaching, so I didn't do that. But I stayed in the X-ray lab 3 weeks with Frank and Helen, his wife, and they took off on a vacation for a week. And I didn't know anything about it, but I did all the X-rays, and Austin did all the dental X-rays. He was interested in dentistry, and so he took the dental X-rays, and I took up the body X-rays. I even did some upper GIs.
Whoa.
Very minimus.
Oh my.
But anyway, we were there for a year. And
He also X-rayed Betty Grable's legs.
Yeah, it was a mobile unit, and you went out
we had a mobile unit, and we went out to different places. They sent me out to Hollywood one day. I didn't know who it was, but when I came back, they told me it was Betty Grable. But it didn't look any different than any other ankle I'd ever seen. But anyway, I went to La Sierra after about a year and a half with Frank, and started there and lived with the Burwells. Didn't have money enough to live in the dormitory, but they were nice to me. Me and another fellow named Bill Rothcab lived in their garage, and we made an apartment out of their garage and lived there. Well, one night while we were there, Dan came, and we were, I don't know where I was that night. I think I was in working with Frank. I used to go in every weekend and work in the X-ray lab. And Dan came in late to get in he was in the dormitory, but he couldn't get in after midnight, and he got into Los Air after midnight, and he came up there to sleep, and in the middle of the night, he heard something going on, and looked over there, and it was a skunk, and he got a shovel and hit that skunk, and boy, he smelled like the skunk breath, and he went inside because he couldn't sleep there, and Lucille always left the back door open because we didn't have a bathroom out there. And so he went in there and crawled it up on the couch and
Oh my.
went to sleep. The next morning, Lucille woke up and said, "What is that smell?" Went in there and said, "Dan Mills, get up there and give me those clothes you've got on. I'm going to burn them." She did. But we had a good time at La Sierra. I was there to 1944, and I finally got my acceptance into Loma Linda by the grace of God, because my grade point wasn't too good.
Tell them about,
Madison.
no, at Loma Linda, Chesterfield.
Well, after I was at La Sierra and finished, I went home to see where it was before this. I went home and came back. Dorothy Johnson, husband, was in Riverside, and she asked me to drive her out there to where he was. They were going to live out there, and she couldn't drive by herself, and she couldn't get anybody else. So I was sitting there waiting for the draft because I had a 1A in my pocket, and I knew I was going to be drafted. But when we got out there, she said they'd pay my way back if I drove her out there. And when we got there, she came up and she said, "Lewis, you give George $100. He did more for me than anybody in the world." So they gave me $100, and then I went to La Sierra to see Bonnie. He was out there in medical school already.
That was a lot of money then.
Yeah, $100 was real money. But anyway, I went to see Barney, and so I went in to see Chester Fink, who was the registrar. I had met him once before, and he knew who I was when I walked in. He said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm waiting for the draft." He said, "You get over at La Sierra and get in school, and I'll get you a deferment." So I went over to La Sierra and plunked that $100 down, started 6 weeks late, and Heppenstall was real good to me. I went in and asked him, we were studying Revelation. I said, "What do I have to do to make up this grade, this 6 weeks?" He said, "We're going to have a test day after tomorrow. If you make a B on that test, you won't have to do anything." So I was very fortunate, and some of the other professors did the same thing for me. And then I went to work at Camp Anza at night during the war. I went in a psychiatric ward, and me and another fellow, I've forgotten who it was, but we would go in there and we'd do all the getting them in bed and everything before 10 o'clock, and we were there till 7 the next morning. So the nurse that was with us said, "Now one of you guys go back there and sleep on the table." We didn't have any bed, but sleep on the table, and the other one stay up here with me, and then in 2 hours, I'll wake that one up, and y'all switch. Every 2 hours, y'all can switch and get it. Each one of you get 4 hours of sleep. So we did that. And then when I got my acceptance to Loma Linda, I came in to see Frank, and I said, "Frank, I won't be here next week." He said, "Why?" I said, "'Cause I'm going to go to Memphis to see if I can raise some money. I got my acceptance." He said, "Good." He said, "How much do you need?" I just had the letter in my pocket that I'd gotten from Loma Linda telling me I'd need $1,250 then, and in 2 weeks. And then when I started school in 4 weeks, I'd have to have $1,250 more dollars. He said, "That's great." I said, "What do you mean that's great?" He said, "Well, ever since you came to work for me, I've been saving money for your medical school, and I got the first 2 years already paid for
Whoa.
and saved up. So he said, "You go on home, here are the keys to my car, you go on home and have fun, and then come on back and I'll give you the money and you can go on." So that's the way I got through medical school.
Boy, oh boy.
Frank paid my medical school bill all the way through.
Mm-mm-mm.
And he was very, very good to me. Fact is, after about 6 weeks of school, when they had applied for my deferment, the FBI, unknown to me, came to the medical lab there, to Frank's house, and talked to him about me, and wanted to know just how really interested in and how faithful I was to the church. And Frank said, well, he said, I would trust him with my wife and family anyway. And he said, but I'll tell you one story that makes me more aware of his own beliefs than anything else. He said, when he came here to live with us,
Sterling?
when he came to live with us, we didn't ever ask a blessing at our table. He said it wasn't long before he asked us if we would mind if he asked the blessing before we prayed, before he ate every time. We told him to go ahead, and from that point on, said he was the spiritual leader in our church and our house. And he said that made me realize that he was worthwhile. And so then I finally met Fay after my second year in medical school.
Okay, well, let us
And I'll
interrupt
let
you.
switch over to
Yeah, I'll
her.
switch to her at that. But one more question I want to ask. I know that when you were in Loma Linda at some point, you worked at a place shooting the Rice Krispies out of the cannon,
Yeah, that was
or
in
the
Loma Linda.
puffed rice, wasn't
Yeah.
it? Yeah.
Anderson's popcorn's place.
Hmm.
They made popcorn and sold it to all the theaters around San Bernardino and Redlands and Riverside. And they
It
also
was blessed popcorn.
puffed wheat and puffed rice for cereal.
Mm-hmm.
And I worked there when I was a freshman, and I was a preemie in the preemie class, and we didn't have full studies to do, and so every afternoon I was off. I'd go down there and work, and that's the only way I got any money to get my necessary things,
Mm-hmm.
as such as toothpaste and so forth, haircut, and I had a real good time there and enjoyed it all. And we slept in the basement there at Loma Linda. Had 3 of us in a room. Shorty Odekirk and Albert Olson were my roommates, and we just had a pretty good time all the way through. I'll let Fay tell you some of the things that happened to her now.
Okay, let me stop this and we'll start a new one.